Hi, I'm Sarah Hessel.
Karna Maynard.
And I'm Lauren Gabriel, and today we're going to be presenting the ethical issues behind the Henrietta Lacks case. So Henrietta Lacks was a woman whose cervical cells were taken without her knowledge or consent. These cells were then sent all over the world to different labs, and research was done on them. This research resulted in the discovery of a lot of vaccines and cures for many diseases. However, her and her family never received any credit or compensation for these discoveries. So just a bit about what we're going to be presenting today. We'll start off with a brief background of her personal life. Then we'll go into the history of her illness, and then we will discuss the scientific research and the medical studies that were done on her cells, and then we will apply several different ethical theories to this case, and then conclude with which one we deem to be the most morally acceptable. Okay, so a little bit about Henrietta Lacks. So she was born on August 1st, 1920. When she was 14, she married her first cousin, David Lacks, and they had 5 children named Elsie, Lawrence, Deborah, Joseph, and David Lacks Jr. Then on October 4th, today is the anniversary, 1951, she died of cervical cancer. And that information was from a biography of Henrietta Lacks, as is this slide. So on January 29, 1951, she traveled to Johns Hopkins Hospital because she had pain and bleeding in her abdomen. They diagnosed her with cervical cancer and prescribed her multiple radiation treatments. However, during one of the radiation treatments, the doctors took 2 cervical tissue samples without her knowledge or consent and sent it off to a buddy's lab to be studied. She then died when she was 31 at the same hospital. However, her family and her did not know that the cells were taken until 20 years after she had died, because the doctor had contacted her family looking for more blood samples to help separate strands of cells. The family is very uneducated, and when the doctor was explaining it to her, they misinterpreted it and thought that they had cloned their mother, and their mother was, there's multiple Henrietta Lacks living all over the globe. This caused mistrust and a lot of anger towards the situation.
So as Sarah just said, during this case, Henrietta's cells, cervical tissue cells, were taken, and there was an underlying agreement between Henrietta's doctor and his friend Dr. Guy, where any cancer tumors that he was operating with, he would send the samples to his friend in order to further his research. However, there was nothing written in contract. This was just something that they had talked about. And so from the cells that were taken, Dr. Guy took the cells, he began to study and observe them, and what he realized were that these cells were much different than any other cells that he had seen before, and that was because that these cells were immortal, and they were strong and very durable outside of the body, which most cells will die within a few hours or a maximum of 3 days when they're taken outside of the body. And once these cells were taken out, he continued to study them, and he realized that they could be isolated from each other and that they were able to multiply, and they, through the reproduction and multiplication, it created the cell line that we know today as HeLa cells. And from this multiplication, since they were very good at being able to reproduce, Dr. Guy ended up sending these cells all across the country to many other research labs so other scientists could further their research and help benefit them. And the most beneficial thing about this cell line was that these cells could acquire or take on various diseases and illnesses. So therefore, researchers were able to test their different vaccines and medicines on the cells to see how they could possibly react in the human body, and this led to a huge medical breakthrough, such as the creation of the polio vaccine, chemotherapy, and it was cited in over 10,000 patents because so many people wanted to get their hands on these cells. And that was from also the biography of Henrietta Lacks. Then we just wanted to show you guys a video of the trailer that came from the movie about Henrietta's life. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And we hope this would just further explain kind of the situation, medical debate that was going on at the time, and hopefully spark an emotional connection so you could see how her family was feeling at the time in the situation they were living in.
Okay, so this case became very popular and sparked a large debate as to whether or not the ethical guidelines were followed correctly. So the first question that was raised was whether or not the doctor should have first had to ask for Henrietta's consent or permission before he took any of her cells. Another question raised was even if he took her cells without her permission, should he then have notified her before sending them out to different labs for testing? And then a more recent debate that has come up is, although Henrietta died shortly after the cells were taken and she never lived to see everything that they led to, should her family have received some credit or compensation since these cells led to discoveries that brought in millions of dollars and thousands of patents? You would think that since they were the closest link to Henrietta, they should receive some compensation for the role that she played in all of these discoveries. So the first theory we're going to apply to this case is utilitarian theory. And a utilitarian wants to perform the action that will result in the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. In this case, the greatest good would be the potential millions of people that could benefit from research done on HeLa cells. And in this case, taking the cells would result in the consequence of potential research, which could lead to vaccines, cures, and treatments, as well as many other medical discoveries that could help a lot of people. In this case, a utilitarian would say that the physician did have a right to indirect paternalism and to violate Henrietta's autonomy because the potential people that could help outweighs her individual rights. So, in conclusion, a utilitarian would take the stance of taking the cells by any means because the potential good that they could cause outweighs her individual rights and her autonomy. But however, with this ethical standpoint, there is a flaw, and that is that you cannot say that the doctor can definitely predict the future. So the doctor really has no way of knowing at this point when he takes the cells whether research will be successful and whether that greater good will ever really be achieved.
Okay, so another theory we can apply is Kant. So the big basis of Kant is not using people as a mere means to an end. We believe that the doctor was using Henrietta as a mere means to an end because it took her cells to help people down the line to go to research to eventually help people. The research would not have benefited Henrietta in any way because she would not have waited that long. So, under the veil of ignorance in Kant, it should not have been factored in that she was an African American in a time of segregation. That's another thing that we think that makes this immoral under Kant's theory, because the doctor did have a categorical moral duty to Henrietta to do what's right for her, to help her, to treat her, and while he was treating her, he didn't treat her just like every other patient. And to determine, one thing we can do to determine a categorical moral duty is to examine whether or not everyone else at the same time would have performed the same action. Which is difficult to say at that time period because the doctor could have taken it two different ways. They could have said, oh, she's an African American, we don't want her cells. Or we could have said that she's an African American, she's part of a vulnerable population, it's easy for us to take advantage of her and take the cells. So because it's so hard to determine which way a doctor's thought process will go, Kant would say, do not do that action, do not take the cells, because not everyone else undeniably would have taken the cells. But today's standards, no one would have taken the cells. You have to have consent, you have to have informed the patient that this is happening. But even by today's standards, Kant would say, no, don't take the cells. But there are a couple flaws in this theory, too, as with utilitarian. It's not factoring in altruism or the care for people, the care that the doctor has for not only Henrietta, but for all the people that he's potentially saving by sending out those cells. And And it's also not factoring in the consequences of maybe if the doctor had not sent out the cells and they weren't studied and developed, maybe we wouldn't have a polio vaccine, maybe we wouldn't have all of the medical developments that we have today. So another ethical theory you have is relational ethics. There was a relationship between the doctor and Henrietta because the doctor was in a position of authority and had a duty to help her and treat her, which we believe he was doing. He did diagnose her, he prescribed her radiation treatments, he was doing his best to help her in any way he could. Where he violated their relationship was in the trust that Henrietta had between the doctor and herself. She trusted him to verify her and just let her know what was going on, and he didn't do that. So from a relationship ethics standpoint, the doctor did not have taken the cells because he was violating the relationship's trust. The flaw in this theory is that it assumes that the doctor has no relationship with the strangers in the situation, the strangers being all the people that the cells have helped. Every doctor, in reality, has the goal of helping as many people as possible, which is not factored into this theory.
The next theory we analyzed was virtue theory, which, as we've learned, virtue theory is when someone will act in a certain way in order to try to gain a virtuous characteristic that they desire. In this case is that we have the doctor who is acting and making decisions based off his profession, which we believe to try to gain the virtue of loyalty. And this loyalty came from him trying to be loyal to his friend Dr. Guy and to the scientific community to help better and further research that they perform. However, we believed he did not achieve this goal because along the way he forgot about the loyalty that he owed to Henrietta, and she had put her trust in him that he was going to tell her how the procedure would go. He would not deviate from what he had told her previously before she went into the operation. And therefore, since he did not achieve this loyalty to both parties, we said that the virtue theory perspective would be that it was not morally acceptable to have taken his cells because he was not loyal and would not have gained this virtue of loyalty because he did not fulfill it through both people that he was involved with. However, this causes a flaw as well because virtue theory does not have any guidelines set for how to achieve this loyalty characteristic, and therefore the doctor could have believed that he was going along the path of gaining this virtue that he desired for his friend, but he didn't have any guidelines for how he would have succeeded in being loyal to both parties at the same time. And then another flaw would be that people could be trying to gain multiple virtues at the same time, and we thought that the doctor could have also been trying to gain the virtue of generosity to his friend, to science, and also helpfulness for furthering the research of the cells and possibly helping with medical breakthroughs. And therefore this causes a lot of conflict when people are trying to gain multiple virtues at once, because he could have been achieving certain virtues at one time but violating the virtues at another time.
So after applying all of these different ethical theories to this case, we concluded that Kant theory would be the most morally acceptable. We feel this is the case because it treats Henrietta mostly as a person. Also because it applies the veil of ignorance, and under this veil of ignorance, the social norms of the time, which included a lot of segregation and racism, aren't taken into account, and therefore her gender and her race also aren't taken into account, and she's just looked at as an equal with everyone else. Here are our sources. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
If you do have questions that you would like to actually ask, as opposed to just writing down.
Should we play the video off YouTube? I don't know why.
Yeah, why don't you find the video, yeah. And if you do have questions, though, from the class, sort of the question that you can seriously, you can ask them. I probably will ask a couple, but. Let's watch the video, okay, good. Which is, oh, well, maybe it'll go. Why don't you try reloading the page, maybe? No? What happens if you click on the, yeah. Does anything happen? Oh, you are clicking, okay.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Where's my sound?